was a sunny afternoon in a quiet South Carolina neighborhood. A 6-year-old girl vanished from her front yard, in broad daylight just feet from her home. What began as a missing child report soon turned into one of the most heartbreaking cases America has ever seen. On Monday, February 10th, 2020, 6-year-old Faye Swetlik came home from school like any other day. The bus dropped her off around 2:50 p.m. in her quiet neighborhood of Churchill Heights in Casey, South Carolina. It was a small, close-knit community, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where kids played outside until dusk, and where danger seemed like something that happened far away. Faye was full of life. Blonde hair, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. She loved her cat, her friends, and playing outside after school. That afternoon, she put down her backpack, told her mother she wanted to play in the front yard, and ran out the door. Minutes later, she was gone. Her mother, Selena Collins, realized something was wrong almost immediately. Faye was never the type to wander off. She called her name through the yard, then the street, then the nearby cul-de-sac. No answer. Panic began to rise. By 4 p.m., she had called 911. Within hours, the small town of Casey transformed into a command center. Police cars lined the streets. Drones and helicopters scanned the area. Officers went door to door, knocking on every house, searching sheds, backyards, and vehicles. The Casey Department of Public Safety, joined by the FBI and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, launched one of the largest missing child investigations in state history. Neighbors came out with flashlights and phones, calling her name into the night. Volunteers combed the woods, ditches, and empty lots. The community refused to sleep. People left porch lights on as a sign of solidarity, a beacon for Faye, wherever she might be. As hours turned into the next day, the search intensified. Investigators retraced her last known moments using doorbell cameras, witness statements, and the school bus's security footage. The video confirmed that she had returned home safely that afternoon. But beyond that, the trail went cold. For law enforcement, time was critical. The first 24 hours after a child's disappearance are the most vital. Every minute that passes reduces the chance of finding them alive. Police set up checkpoints at neighborhood entrances, collecting IDs, searching vehicles, and interviewing everyone in the area. They even drained nearby ponds and dumpsters. By Tuesday morning, the case had already captured national attention. News outlets broadcast Faye's photo, a small girl with a pink shirt and a bright smile. Social media flooded with hashtags, #FindFaye. Celebrities, strangers, and entire communities shared her story, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have seen something. But behind the headlines, investigators were battling silence. There were no ransom calls, no witnesses who saw a struggle, no signs of forced entry. It was as if Faye had simply vanished into thin air. The FBI deployed specialized teams, including child abduction experts and canine units trained to track scent. Helicopters equipped with infrared cameras scoured the wooded areas, while divers searched nearby streams. Each day, the search grid expanded, block by block, yard by yard. Meanwhile, her mother made a public plea, her voice breaking with exhaustion and fear. "Faye loves her family, her cat and her friends," she said through tears. "We just want our baby back." The days blurred together. Locals brought food and water to officers. Churches held prayer vigils. Children placed stuffed animals and drawings at the edge of the search site. Hope clung to the town like fog, fragile, desperate, but unbroken. Then, as Wednesday turned to Thursday, something shifted. Officers noticed a city trash truck making its routine rounds through the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual. Except this time, they followed the route closely. At one of the pickup points, they found a small plastic bag containing an item that would change everything. a polka-dotted boot, identical to the one Faye had been wearing when she disappeared. The neighborhood, once filled with volunteers, fell silent. The discovery narrowed the search to a few homes, including one directly across the street from where Faye had lived. By that evening, the tone of the investigation changed from hopeful to grim. Detectives expanded their search to the nearby property of a man named Cody Scott Taylor, a 29-year-old neighbor who lived alone. He had no criminal record and had even spoken with officers during the initial search, claiming he knew nothing. He seemed calm, too calm. Police decided to monitor him quietly overnight as they prepared for another morning of searching. On Thursday, February 13th, officers returned to continue the search through the neighborhood, and within minutes, everything stopped. At 10 a.m., investigators found the lifeless body of Faye Swetlik in a wooded area between her home and Taylor's residence. She had been murdered. Minutes later, just a few feet away, officers discovered the body of Cody Taylor inside his own home, dead by suicide. The small town of Casey, which had held its breath for 4 long days, finally exhaled. But not in relief. It was grief, disbelief, and horror. The bright, smiling girl who vanished from her front yard had never left the neighborhood at all. The monster had been living right across the street. The morning of February 13th, 2020 began like the others, cold, tense, and quiet. Officers were combing through trash, checking drains, and scouring every inch of Churchill Heights. It was the 4th day of the search for 6-year-old Faye Swetlik, and hope was wearing thin. Still, no one was prepared for what they were about to find. A team of investigators had been assigned to follow the neighborhood trash collection route. As workers emptied bins into the truck, officers inspected each one. In one of the containers, they noticed a small plastic bag that didn't belong there. Inside was a child's polka-dotted boot and a soup ladle that appeared to have been stained with dirt and blood. It was the moment the search turned into a crime scene. Detectives immediately ordered a sweep of every property along the garbage route. Their attention quickly turned to one house, a modest, single-story home across the street from Faye's. It belonged to 29-year-old Cody Scott Taylor, a quiet, unassuming man who lived alone. He wasn't a stranger. He was the neighbor everyone saw mowing his lawn, waving politely, sometimes chatting with parents as they waited for the school bus. He had even spoken to police days earlier, letting them search his house briefly without resistance. Nothing unusual had been found at the time, but now, armed with new evidence, detectives decided to return. As officers regrouped near the wooded area that separated Taylor's home from the Swetliks, they made a discovery that froze them in place. In a shallow, freshly disturbed patch of earth, partially concealed beneath leaves, they found what they had all feared: the small body of Faye Swetlik. Her pink shirt and polka-dotted boots matched the description from the Amber Alert. The area was less than 150 feet from her front yard, close enough for her mother to see it from the window. The scene was handled with absolute precision. Investigators cordoned off the neighborhood and immediately called the coroner. Residents were evacuated, and every available officer was redirected to secure the perimeter. Forensic teams began documenting the area inch by inch, collecting soil, fibers, and trace evidence. As police expanded their search to nearby properties, another chilling discovery awaited them. Inside Cody Taylor's home, officers found him dead, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood. The cause was immediately apparent: a self-inflicted knife wound to the neck. But the items found around his body told a darker story. There were cleaning supplies, bleach, towels, gloves, and traces of blood consistent with an attempt to cover up a crime. A child's hairbrush and a small pink rubber ball were also recovered, both later confirmed to contain Faye's DNA. On a countertop sat an open notebook with handwritten entries, though none contained a confession. Forensic analysis revealed Faye's blood on Taylor's shoes and carpet fibers from his home on her clothing. The conclusion became undeniable. Cody Taylor had kidnapped and murdered Faye Swetlik, then taken his own life as police closed in. But the question that haunted detectives and the community was why. Investigators interviewed neighbors who described Taylor as quiet and friendly, if a little strange. He lived alone, had no history of violence and no criminal record. He'd grown up in the area, worked retail jobs, and kept mostly to himself. He wasn't on any offender lists or under surveillance. To most people, he was invisible, just another face in a suburban neighborhood. But as detectives delved into his background, they uncovered a portrait of isolation and instability. Taylor had struggled with depression and social withdrawal for years. He had recently lost his job and spent most of his time at home. Some neighbors recalled seeing him watching children play from his porch, though they hadn't thought much of it. For the FBI's behavioral unit, the profile fit a disturbing pattern. A socially isolated offender whose fantasy life had escalated into violence. The opportunity was spontaneous, a moment when Faye was briefly alone in her front yard. In that window of minutes, Taylor acted on an impulse that had likely been building for months. Authorities believe that he lured Faye into his house sometime between 3 and 3:15 p.m. on February 10th. What happened next remains largely unknown. Autopsy results later confirmed that Faye died of asphyxiation within hours of her abduction. After killing her, Taylor kept her body hidden for several days, possibly in his home, before moving it to the nearby wooded area the morning she was found. When police began to close in, he realized the end was near. He placed the boot and ladle in the trash, perhaps as a desperate attempt to mislead investigators, then took his own life inside the house. When the official press conference was held later that day, Casey Department of Public Safety Director Byron Snellgrove's voice trembled as he announced the discovery. "It is with extremely heavy hearts that we have found the body of Faye Swetlik," he said. Behind him, officers stood with heads bowed. Some had tears in their eyes. The small community that had spent 4 sleepless nights searching now faced a new kind of nightmare. The realization that the danger had never been far away. The monster wasn't a stranger who came from out of town. He had been right there, living across the street. That afternoon, candles appeared on doorsteps. People laid flowers and stuffed animals along the sidewalk near the Swetlik home. Churches opened their doors for vigils. Parents hugged their children tighter, haunted by the thought of how easily it could have been them. The FBI closed the case within days, concluding that Cody Taylor had acted alone and that there was no ongoing threat to the community. But for the people of Casey, the damage was done. The sense of safety that had defined their small town was gone forever. In the days that followed, one phrase echoed through newsrooms, vigils, and living rooms across America. A phrase that captured the heartbreak of an entire nation. She was right there, all along. When the news of Faye Swetlik's death spread through Casey, it felt as though time had stopped. The same neighborhood that had once echoed with children's laughter now stood in silence. Police tape still fluttered in the wind. Stuffed animals and pink balloons lined the sidewalks. Strangers who had never met the 6-year-old girl wept openly. For days, the story dominated headlines nationwide. Reporters stood outside the cul-de-sac where Faye had vanished, their cameras pointed toward the modest homes that now felt like the epicenter of something unthinkable. It wasn't just another crime. It was the betrayal of safety itself. How could something so horrific happen in a place so ordinary? At the Casey Department of Public Safety, officers were physically and emotionally exhausted. Many had children of their own. One detective later said, "It broke us. We weren't just searching for a missing child. We were searching for one of our own." The discovery of Faye's body changed the tone of the entire department. Grief turned into a relentless need for answers. The autopsy results confirmed what investigators had already suspected. Faye had died from asphyxiation within hours of her abduction. There were no signs of prolonged torture. Forensic evidence tied her directly to Cody Taylor's home, removing any remaining doubt. For law enforcement, it was the closure of a case. But for the community, it was the beginning of trauma. Churches filled with mourners. Candlelight vigils lit up the night sky. People prayed, sang, and left notes for a little girl they'd only known through a photograph. Smiling, bright-eyed, wearing her favorite polka-dotted boots. At her funeral, hundreds of people gathered to say goodbye. Faye's mother, her voice breaking, told the crowd, "My baby loved everyone she met. She brought joy wherever she went. Please remember her that way." The service ended with the release of pink and purple balloons, her favorite colors, drifting into the sky as the choir sang, "You Are My Sunshine." In the months that followed, the town of Casey changed. Parents no longer let their children play outside alone. Neighbors watched each other more closely. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now bolted shut. A sense of innocence had been stripped away, replaced by quiet vigilance. But amid the sorrow, something remarkable happened. The community came together stronger than ever before. Memorials were built, scholarships were created in Faye's name, and strangers who had stood side by side during the search continued to support one another long after the cameras left. At Springdale Elementary School, Faye's classmates planted a small garden near the playground, a place where they could sit, talk, and remember her. Her teacher described her as the kind of child who made every day brighter, the girl who would share her crayons with anyone who didn't have one. The garden became a symbol of resilience, a living reminder that light can grow even after tragedy. Meanwhile, the investigation into Cody Taylor's life continued to haunt experts. Behavioral analysts from the FBI examined his background, trying to understand what drove him to commit such an act. They found no history of sexual offenses, no violent tendencies, no manifestos or online threats. He wasn't driven by ideology or hatred, only by something darker, quieter, and harder to define. Psychologists described him as a decompensating loner, someone whose isolation had festered into detachment from reality. He had no social circle, no long-term job, and no close family nearby. What he did have was opportunity, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. One profiler put it simply: he wasn't a monster who hunted for years. He was a man who lost control once, and in that one moment, destroyed everything. That explanation brought little comfort. For many, the hardest part was how ordinary Taylor seemed. He lived across the street, waved to neighbors, and even offered to help during the search for Faye. There was no warning sign, no sinister look, no prior crime. The realization that pure evil could wear such a familiar face shook people to their core. Over time, the media coverage faded. The neighborhood rebuilt. The search banners came down. But for the people of Casey, the story of Faye Swetlik never truly ended. It became a quiet scar, a reminder of vulnerability, of how fragile safety really is. 2 years later, in February 2022, the community gathered once again. They held a memorial at the park, unveiling a bench engraved with her name, in loving memory of Faye Marie Swetlik, forever our sunshine. Children placed flowers along the seat, their parents holding them close. That day, the mayor of Casey spoke softly to the crowd. Faye's story will never leave us, but neither will her light. She showed us the power of love, even in the face of unimaginable darkness. The tragedy of Faye Swetlik is not just the story of a crime. It is the story of a community's heartbreak and resilience. A story that reminds us how quickly the world can change, and how the smallest lives can leave the biggest impact. Because in the end, Faye's light didn't fade with her passing. It stayed. In the candles, in the flowers, in the way people hold their children a little closer when they step outside. And even now, when dusk falls over Casey and the streetlights flicker on, there's a sense that her spirit is still there, watching, protecting, reminding everyone who loved her that innocence, though fragile, can never truly be taken away.